and welcome to Razz Reviews. Today, I'm going to be reviewing Apocalypse Now. Fair warning though, this movie might have some spoilers from the film if you haven't seen it. Apocalypse Now is directed by Francis Ford Coppola, and it's a light adaptation of a novella called Heart of Darkness. It follows the story of Benjamin Willard, played by Sheen, who's on a secret mission in Vietnam to assassinate Colonel Kurtz, played by Marlon Brando, who has gone rogue and is presumed to have gone mad in the jungle. At the time, it was a controversial film because of its commentary on the war itself, and also because of all the dark and heavy themes that it dealt with. And also, the making of this film was basically a nightmare for everybody involved. By the way, if you have seen Apocalypse Now, I highly recommend checking out the documentary about the making of the film. Basically, the crew and the people working on this film actually went mad in the jungle. A lot of stuff happened, like Marlon Brando showing up on set overweight and not knowing his lines. Sheen was struggling with addiction and he had a heart attack. They had weather disasters. It was a complete nightmare. But I want to talk about the movie itself with the top 3 things I liked about Apocalypse Now. Number 3, the visuals. In a fantastic combination of cinematography and editing, the visuals of this film are iconic. There are amazing set pieces here and fight and action sequences that will blow your mind, especially looking at it back then. They were able to achieve amazing sequences, especially when it comes to the helicopter fight scenes. What's also very cool about Apocalypse Now is how the visuals and the colors mirror the descent into madness. When the film starts out, it's just typical Vietnam War setting. The colors match that kind of scenario and atmosphere. However, the further the crew sail down the river, the more crazy the war gets, and the more crazy they get, and the more crazy the visuals get. And it's very effective because we also lose ourselves with the movie. And I think that's one of Apocalypse Now's biggest achievement, is to get us, the viewers, to really feel the descent into chaos and war. And it's not only the cinematography, there is masterful editing in this film. There's a lot of innovative storytelling techniques and edits that are used in this film that create some really cool sequences and very nice editing tricks. One of my favorite ones is in the opening sequence of the film when Willard is in his room and he's going through this PTSD breakdown thing, and you see the ceiling fan and it kind of overlaps with the helicopters and how the ceiling fan reminds him of the helicopters and the war. It's so effective and so awesome, and it's one of the examples of the cool things that was done in Apocalypse Now to give you that raw emotion and psychology of the characters and the people at war. The number 2 thing I like about Apocalypse Now is the themes. Look, this movie is very complex. It's not very narrative, and it mostly deals with the themes and the complexities of the psychology behind the actual story. When Francis Ford Coppola released the film, he spoke in a press conference and said that this film is not about the Vietnam War, it is the Vietnam War. And if Apocalypse Now does something right, it's that particular feeling and emotion. This is the kind of movie that when it's done, you can't help but sit and think about it. Think about what it meant, think about why that scene was there and why that person said or did that. Somewhere down the middle and towards the end, the film gets very chaotic and crazy, and that's kind of what war is. It's nuts, it doesn't make any sense. And you as a viewer feel closer and closer to madness, just like those soldiers feel closer to madness the longer they are in the war. And it also makes a very strong commentary on the recklessness of war. There's a lot of unnecessary deaths and just rampant killing that doesn't make any sense. And I feel like that's probably what happens in these situations. You're killing random people, some of them are innocent, you don't know. It gets very, very complicated. And for someone who's a soldier, how do they make peace with that? Well, the answer Apocalypse Now gives is that they don't. They become crazy. They become an insane version of themselves. And this idea especially applies to the Vietnam War because it's one of those wars where people didn't know what they were fighting for. And that kind of thought-evoking is what makes films last throughout time and what makes them stay with us, because we're constantly analyzing them and thinking about them, and they inspire us as well. The number 1 thing I like about Apocalypse Now is the use of sound. This movie has one of the best sound design and sound mixing that I've ever seen. It's so influential, and it really tells you how effective sound can be when you use it as a tool to tell a story or to evoke a certain emotion. From the combination and the heart-wrenching sounds of people dying and explosions to the sounds of the helicopters just going pop, 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 kind of like machine guns and kind of like the anxiety that a soldier feels in the middle of battle, all of it coming together gives you that feeling and emotion and puts you right there in the scene and in the action. It's absolutely incredible, especially for that time. It's completely ahead of its time. The iconic use of the Doors' song "This Is the End" is one of the coolest things to ever happen when it comes to using music for a soundtrack in a film. That opening sequence with that song is one of my favorite opening sequences of all time. And there are many examples. There's also the use of Flight of the Valkyries in the helicopter attack. It's just all so amazing and so visual. It feels like it's epic. It feels like it's bigger than it actually is. And that's what happens when you use music effectively. effectively. It's so haunting and evocative that you can never forget it. I never hear "This is the end" by The Doors and not think of Apocalypse Now. As fascinating as Apocalypse Now is, it's definitely not a perfect film. So let's talk about the top 3 things I didn't like about Apocalypse Now. Number 3, it's long. This is a very, very long, slow movie. It takes a lot to get through it. It clocks in at like 2 hours and 30 minutes, and there are other versions like the Redux that's like 4 hours and 49 minutes. Oh my god, it's as long as the war itself. It takes a certain energy and a mood to sit through this film, and definitely you have to free up an entire evening for it. And it's also very exhausting. It's not a film that you can rewatch all the time because it takes a lot out of you. It does really drag on, and it feels like, okay, can we just get to see Marlon Brando, please? Every time you think, okay, this is the scene where we're gonna meet Colonel Kurtz. Nope, it's just another weird sequence. Okay. Speaking of which, the number 2 thing I don't like about Apocalypse Now is that it gets self-indulgent. What I mean by that is that sometimes there is such a thing as going too deep or too philosophical, that it becomes boring and confusing, to be honest. You cross the line a little bit from, ooh, this is cool and interesting, to what on earth is happening? There are scenes in there that make absolutely no sense and feel like they're out of this world, and they don't feel like they contribute to the story much. One of those particular scenes for me is when they come across this, like, I don't know, French base, and these people sit around a table for what feels like an eternity, and they're just talking about the war and like the surrendering and the themes and the philosophies of who wins and who loses and who is history being written by. Oh my god. And it's just so self-indulgent and so unnecessary. Like, come on, let's move on. I get it. The number 1 thing I don't like about Apocalypse Now is the lack of narrative. Now, at the end of the day, a movie is a story. You have to follow the story, you have to feel for the characters, and you have to be invested in the outcome. One of the biggest problems with Apocalypse Now is that it spends so much time investing in its philosophies and themes and psychology that it loses its grip on the emotion and on the plot and the storyline. There isn't really anything here to latch onto. A lot of characters die and bad things happen, and you actually feel nothing. You feel like you're just floating on that river, confused and waiting to reach a certain plot point or development. So as cool and as fascinating as the thematic elements of the film, the emotional content and the storyline investment is sacrificed at that expense. The way I think about it is when I compare it to some of my other favorite war films, like Deer Hunter, for example, this is where the film falters. However, none of this takes away from the fact that Apocalypse Now is a film ahead of its time, and it's so impactful in that powerful and visceral experience that it puts you through. I think Apocalypse Now is a fantastic war film. It's definitely not for everybody, but I think everybody should check it out just to make up their own minds about it. But I personally am a big fan, and I'm gonna give Apocalypse Now an 8.5 out of 10. So, have you ever seen Apocalypse Now? What's your favorite war film? Let me know in the comment section, and as always, like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to tell me what you'd like me to review for you next. See ya!